practitioners and professionals to try and kind of establish differentiation in the marketplace, saying, look at me, I have this type of certification or this type of education background. Because a lot of times the consumers, the organizations, the hiring managers and the HR people don't know what the heck they're looking at when they're trying to hire people. And so you have that alphabet soup trying to kind of attempt to differentiate that, I'm different than the others because I have these certifications and whatnot.
Hi, this is your PM Cowboy coming back to you with an exciting guest and an exciting topic. I have got PMI and project management royalty in the house, Philip Diab. If you don't know him, look him up. You need to connect with him on LinkedIn. A great colleague, also a great, we don't like the word influencer, do we? What do we call ourselves?
Advocate.
Advocate is a better. We're classical project, program, and portfolio advocates, also PMO advocates. And Philip will introduce himself in greater detail in just a moment. But let's talk about what our topic will be. We always try to kind of mix it up and bring in different exciting new guests and exciting new topics, but we always like to return home. And home for us is anything that has to do with projects, programs, portfolios, and then by extension PMOs. Okay, we have the privilege and the honor to have Philip on board, and Philip is another hardcore project management cowboy that has experience in all four of those things, and we're going to kind of pick his brain now to stay in line with the project management cowboy theme. Philip has suggested, why don't we take the title, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, which I thought was a brilliant idea, Philip. But after thinking about it a little bit, we want to end on a good note, so we're going to reverse it. We're going to start off with the ugly, the bad, and then do the good. You could also say PMOs, past, present, future, but there's not a correlation between timeline and what's ugly, what's bad, and what's good. Okay? So, Philip, welcome. Glad to have you. Philip, we have a tradition at the PM Cowboy Podcast, and that is every guest gets to introduce themselves. We want to know your passion journey. We want to know who are you, where do you come from, what possessed you, to use another P word, what possessed you to become the project, program, portfolio, and PMO advocate that you are.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. And, I've often thought about this because most of our colleagues in project management come from what they call an accidental journey. They happen to be doing a technical role or a business role, and then they're tapped on the shoulder to come in and become project managers. And that's where they become accidental PMs. For me, I would say it was an accidental volunteer. I happened to be in Boston late in the 1990s, tagging along with my wife, who happened to be a PMI employee attending the PMI symposium.
What did she do at PMI?
She was the SIG coordinator. The SIGs were
special interest groups.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they were topical in nature and focused on different domains within project management, which is something that's interestingly enough coming back into the strategy of PMI, focusing on PMI next.
As it should.
So I was tagging along. I was a full-time MBA student, just taking some vacation time and thinking that I would enjoy Boston. And as I was walking through the lobby, a couple of volunteers stopped me and we started chatting. And I thought, well, maybe this could be an interesting career path.
These guys aren't too bad, right?
Exactly. So that's how I got my introduction into PMI, signed up as a volunteer, started the student chapter at Thunderbird in Phoenix. And that's what led into me, once finishing my MBA program, looking for a job in project management, and got the journey kicked off. And I've never looked back. I've had the honor and privilege of working in different capacities in project management, first as a junior project manager, then growing in my career, managing large, complex transformation programs, leading portfolios, building, designing, and launching PMOs. And I've done it, with global teams. Started out in the US, then I began looking at more of a global role. Then I moved to the Middle East in the mid-2000s and worked with a variety of organizations. I've also been fortunate in that I've worked both as an internal employee and a consultant in a variety of different roles a lot of the focus has been around business transformation, technology enablement, and the full gamut of building capability in organizations, leading teams, and changing cultures. And I've done it also with small, medium, and large organizations, as small as a company of 2 and as large as IBM with, at the time, 350,000
And
employees.
IBM is one of the companies you work for, right?
It is indeed. Yeah, I worked for them in the US right before I wrapped up my engagement. Then I moved to the region in the Middle East and worked in consulting as well with Booz Allen here in the region for a few years. And my latest assignment was with COP28 here in the UAE. This is the Global Climate Action Summit that included approximately 120 global leaders and over 100,000 climate action participants. And I was the chief operating officer for the event that was held in 2023. So it was quite an exciting event as a capstone in terms of bringing together everything that I'd learned in project management and applying it in the context of a mega event and operation as well.
That was a quick run through. People who speed through their CV do that usually because they think that nobody wants to hear it, but we do want to hear it. So I want to ask you some questions about your background.
Absolutely.
What did you do before your MBA?
So I graduated college with a degree in business administration, and I got into a management training program.
Where did you go to college originally?
Birmingham, Alabama, at a school called Birmingham Southern. Yeah, so that I grew, a little bit of background. I grew up in Amman, Jordan, and when I was in high school, we met some people who eventually became friends. They came to Jordan, and they had an opportunity to interact with my parents. And my parents mentioned to them, "I'm interested in going to school in the U.S." It turned out that they were professors at the university that I ended up going. So that was the connection. So they introduced us to Birmingham and to Birmingham Southern, and that started the journey for me.
Did you do any work before you did your MBA, or did you go directly onto your MBA?
I worked for about 2 years before the MBA, but it was one of those jobs where I knew it was really what pushed me into doing the MBA program, because it was retail management. Like many young professionals who just graduate college, you either love it or hate it. I did not fit in the love it category. I wanted to do something different, and the MBA program provided that bridge to finding something else.
The reason I'm asking you these questions is because you said something which is very, very powerful, and I want to kind of entertain it with you, because the background of a lot of project managers of our generation is that we also do a business administration degree, sometimes an IT. We start working, and then we kind of get selected for projects. Usually our projects are small. I like to call them the 5 kilo projects, right? We're not really trained in project management, but somehow we do a good job. And then you get a 10 kilo project and a 20 kilo project and a 50 kilo project. And latest, by the time when you get a reputation and senior managers are trying to trip you up or challenge you even more, and they give you a 500 or 1,000 kilo project, that's when we start looking to the left and the right, and we start buying books like this and say, hey, do I need to make every mistake in the book by myself? Autodidactic is cool, it's fun, but learning to swim by jumping in the deep end of the pool can be risky. But you interestingly, you started off actually with an academic perspective in mind by chance, but that's actually a brilliant entry into project management.
I mean, it was very fortunate for me because I think that the PMBOK guide had just been released, so I literally just grabbed the copy.
It was about this big back then.
Yeah,
I have one here somewhere.
Exactly. So I had the opportunity to read it, get familiar with it long before I even got my first job in project management, which is, I think, for certainly our generation, is very atypical. The traditional path of many people was almost the reverse, as you described it.
Yeah. I also want to point out, for those of you who said, you guys didn't know anything back then. Yeah, the PMBOK was this thin, but do you remember they used to have this substack of books? You could have either the mini stack or the full stack. I think it was like 14 or 17. I have copies of them over here somewhere as well. these were like different books that because PMI would say, listen, the exam is tough. And since the PMBOK is this thin, there's only so many questions we can derive from that. We're gathering books, and they used to recommend buying Substack. You remember that?
Absolutely. And this reminds me of what my dad used to say. This is when you used to travel 4 hours in the snow uphill both ways to take the exam, right?
Yeah. Good. So that's a little bit about your background. Now, you're culturally diverse as well, which makes you doubly interesting. But you also have a part of your CV brings you into, and I called you PMI royalty, because you said you were involved in the student chapter at Thunderbird, but you also moved on to other heights within PMI. Tell us a little bit about your tenure with PMI.
Absolutely. I think that this is one of the greatest things that I latched on to was volunteerism within PMI, because it's been a lifelong journey, really. It started out at the local level and then quickly transformed into the international level and the national level. I had the opportunity to serve in a variety of volunteer roles within the SIGs that we mentioned before, financial services, marketing and sales, as well as different local chapters. And right about the time that I was done with one of the SIGs, I had an opportunity to move into a greater visibility role, and I ran for the PMI Board of Directors position. I was successful, and I joined the board in 2003, served on the global board for 6 years, and the capstone year was when I served as the global chair of PMI. And I had the honor of actually serving in every single officer position of PMI. I served as chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and the chair of the strategic planning committee. So it's been quite the learning, and I feel like it was a very big privilege and honor to do that. I will say that as exciting as that journey was in terms of being influential in shaping the strategy of PMI, what I really enjoyed the most, and that was the biggest takeaway for me, is traveling to over 40 countries and visiting with, meeting hundreds, if not thousands of PM practitioners, learning from them, hearing about the journey, and really the excitement. Project management has had a huge impact on many lives in terms of changing them, not just in the power of projects when they get done right and they're successful, but the lives of the project management practitioners whose lives have been positively impacted by being associated with the profession, being associated with PMI. So it's been great seeing that and hearing their stories across the globe.
Your history with PMI is exactly 9 years longer than mine. I got involved with PMI in 1999 when I became proponent for the Vienna, Austria chapter. And I think it's important. I think it's important for our generation to remind the new generation that not everything that this generation is better than what it was in the past. I still think that PMI to a certain extent has this culture, but I think what you kind of said, what endeared you to project management and PMI in the beginning was the people, right? And I want to have a shout out to all those people of our generation. I remember the first symposium I went to in Philadelphia, where we had a plenary session where all the chapters, presidents of the world sat around in a Congress type setting, and we had the typical Senate rules, and you could make motions. And what I loved about PMI, and this is a saying that they used very strongly back then, I haven't heard it in a long time, was this principle of think global and act local. And I think, although PMI originally was a very American organization, it very, very, very quickly in our time, in our tenure, became a global player. And maybe that's something we could talk about when we're talking about past, present, and future, what some of the challenges of PMI might be in the future and what they could do a little bit better. You worked under Greg Ballestero, I think, before him,
Greg
during
was
him,
the
and after
CEO
him?
when I was on the board. Greg was our CEO. He joined PMI in 2002, and so the board that was just 1 year preceded me selected him as our CEO, and then I joined the board and worked closely with Greg and Mark Langley and the team.
Yeah, Mark Langley is a great guy.
Staff organization at the time. as they are today as well. So not many remaining, from that older generation, but
there's still a lot of them are somewhere still in the background. Some of them have gone into real retirement, but I'm sure you're still in contact with them. I'm in contact with a number of them. Let's start and take a look at our loose framework for our discussion. We want to talk about the ugly, the bad, and the good when it comes to project management. And I thought that sequence would be a good place to start. There's an old saying in German which is paint the devil on the wall. You do that to kind of set the tone. What are the challenges that we face? What are some of and maybe we don't have to say ugly. Maybe ugly is too harsh. But what are some of the things, some of the pet peeves or issues that still concern you after so many decades as a project management professional?
It's an interesting question, and it is a bit of an ugly side, but more from a risk perspective. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest areas of risk for both the PMO and to some extent project management in general is that when it is seen as a bureaucratic check the box exercise, particularly when the PMO is viewed as an auditing function, red tape, where it's just simply there to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and if they're not, report them to the principal so that they can get a timeout. That's one of my pet peeves, because it's just really showcases more than anything the lack of engagement in terms of really getting the PMO to do what it can do in an organization, regardless of what flavor of PMO you might have. And I think it might be good here to kind of set a little bit of context in that when I think of the term PMO, I think of different types of PMOs. There might be a project office. Some people called it project office.
I love that word. I wish it was still, people would still use it appropriately, because there is a difference between now they call it, I think, a project specific PMO, which is semantically incorrect. It's called a project office.
True, but there are people that also refer to it as a PMO as well.
Yeah.
Program office, project support office, or projects support office. You might have heard an office where it provides services like scheduling and cost control and that sort of function. There are departmental PMOs, and then there are enterprise PMOs. And again, the P could be for project, program, or portfolio. And that's really the amount of diversity that you have in the PMO arena, is that you have multiple flavors. And as I'm sure when you're talking about the different types of PMOs, they could be controlling, directing, supporting.
Yes, and quite honestly, I'm just in the process of reading through the new PMO practice guide, and even old farts like us. There's some really good thought in there, because it's really done by a community of people equal to ours, peers of ours, who sat down and says, you know what, we all know a lot, but do we always share semantically and accurately the same vocabulary, the same concept? Definitely, that might be something we can talk about when we talk about the good.
Absolutely. I think one comment that I would have related to this, and this has influenced the way that I look at things initially. If you look 20 years ago, I was a lot more idealistic about the way that I approached project management standards. And I used to think that it was a huge weakness, perhaps part of the ugly side, that we didn't have a common definition and agreed upon framework for PMOs. And while it's fantastic that the PMO guide is out, the practice guide standard is out, and it is a huge step in the right direction, I think part of the power of PMO and diversity is that it has to fit the context of the organization and the needs. So in my view now, it's okay for it to be different flavors, different types, different mandates, because the reality of the matter is the value that it brings to the table has to be specific to the needs of the organization. Yeah. If I may piggyback another thought, because we're still talking about the ugly.
Yeah. We're going to deep dive on some of these ugly points, because I think they need to be fleshed out a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that I'm reminded of also is, and I think this is where we started interacting, I had put together a post around toxic culture or toxic behavior in organizations. I think that one part of ugly definitely has to do with the toxic behavior in organizations. And I think that when you're thinking of toxic behavior, it can happen at the individual level, the team level, or the organization level. And I think that certainly toxic behavior at a PMO level can also be part of that ugly side, in the sense that if people are not aligned, they don't have a common goal that they're going after, they don't have shared values. And I'm not talking about like moral values, but rather organizational values. There's not a common understanding of what they're trying to accomplish. That brings about toxic behavior in terms of negative competition, showmanship, upmanship, trying to outdo each other, especially when interacting with executives. That is still something that I think we have to watch out for, to make sure that as we lead and stand up PMOs, we try and avoid and navigate through that as far as organization culture is concerned.
Do you know, that was the word that made me want to reach out to you, because one of the principles of a PM Cowboy is to call a spade a spade. So you know what? It was exactly that word, the word toxic in your post, that made me want to reach out to you. It made me suspect that I have a kindred spirit in Abu Dhabi. You're in Abu Dhabi, right? Yeah. Because I think one of the things you kind of, as a trait, win as an expert who's been around for a while, is you get a little bit impatient. You only got so much time left, and you want to make the best of it. And I always say it's important to call a spade a spade. All of these wonderful books back here always try to paint a future that is bright and shiny. But I think to get to that bright and shiny future, you need to take a look at the ugly aspects, and toxicity in many different flavors is something that impacts projects and programs and portfolios at many occasions. I would go as far to say, I don't think it's necessarily an application of methodologies, which is the primary determinant of whether your project is successful or not. I think it's a big factor. Whether you have a decent framework is important, all right, because it gives people something to work around. But I think it's the human factor, the psychological factor, sometimes even unbeknownst to the stakeholders who are being toxic. They're not even aware of their toxicity. And that's why I reached out to you, because this guy probably has some interesting things to say. Let me maybe put this into a context, because I'm interested if you do the same thing, having your consulting and also a practitioner background. One of the things I love to do, and we're both kind of missionaries still for our subject matter. We're kind of evangelists. We still go around, not necessarily beating people upside the head with a PMBOK. That might come at a later stage. But there's some foundational principles in the PMBOK which I fell in love with a long time ago, and I find that the foundational principles in the PMBOK are really the most valuable part of the PMBOK. Mm-hmm. The problem is PMI, I think sometimes for political reasons, has a certain subtlety on how it communicates it, right? It always communicates it in a kind of vanilla flavor so that nobody would be offended by what they say. And one of the foundational principles that traditional project management identified and people often ignored, and Agile doubled down on it and said, no, it's even more important, and said they called us on it, was the principle that success of a project is not only determined by the project manager and his or her team. The sponsorship and the support, the matrix organization, the line organizations, senior management, executive management participation in large programs is essential for success, right? Mm-hmm. And my personal ugly experience, even after so many years in project management, is I have this saying, 100% of everybody I know uses the word project inflationary. It's a ubiquitous term, project this, project that. Maybe they call it initiative, maybe to give it a different flavor, but it's a project, right? So I would say 100% of people pretty much have a concept of what a project is. But if you would ask that same sample group what project management is decisively, systematically, step by step, right? I would say you'd be lucky if you look at the global spectrum if 20% know what that formal process is. And I think that's something that's ugly. I would go even a step further. When I talk to executives, I like to tease them a little bit in a friendly sort of way. I said, they say, what do you do? I'm a project management consultant. Great. And it says, do you guys work on projects are essential to our organization. I go, why? Because we use it to deliver our complex services and products to our clients. I say, great. And then I like to ask, you probably do the same thing, right? I ask, well, how many projects do you have in your portfolio? I intentionally use the word, right? Mm-hmm. And then you might get a concrete answer, or they go, I don't know, which is already a red flag if you ask me if I'm talking to an executive, right? Next question, I go, well, how do you select your projects, right? Next question I might ask is, do you have a fixed budget for your project, right? Do you have strategic objectives, right? Do you have MBOs for it? And I notice the more I subtly, it's kind of, you start at the tip of the iceberg and you start working down, the more you ask this question, and this is the ugly point I want to mention too, I think we don't just, in the project management big picture, suffer under the lack of executive attention and awareness, or attention. It's awareness. I'm shocked by how many executives still have an arm's length approach to project management. They want it when they want it. They want it immediately. They want it now. All hands on deck. Damn it, it's an emergency. We better get it done. But if you want to talk about details, they're like, leave me alone with that operational crap. I'm exaggerating here. What's your experience? Do you have a similar experience?
Well, I think it's a very broad kind of concept. I can tell you that one of the things that I was fortunate with is that when I started out in my career in project management, I worked for a mid-size organization in healthcare insurance. And our PMO, and I was a project manager tagged to a PMO, was very much driving strategic initiatives. So that gave me a very specific type of thinking that within the organizational context that I was working within, projects were there to help manage the implementation of strategy. So it was always
so there was an automatic precursor. There was a prerequisite to align with strategy. Yeah.
And this is long before anything around the program management standard or the portfolio management standard came out. It was almost, it was actually our strategy VP had read Good to Great, which is Collins' book. And at the time thought, well, how do we implement strategy? Well, we're taking strides to devise strategy and engage our executive team, but we need to have a practice to implement it. And that's where the concept behind the PMO, establishing a corporate projects office to oversee and orchestrate the projects. So to me, a lot of the ideas initially that came out around PMOs came out from that experience. Now, I would say that's not always the case because different organizations have different needs. And oftentimes organizations are, the way that projects are launched are not necessarily top down. Sometimes they're bottom up. And so it's very much a different set of needs that I've seen across organizations. And the larger the organization is, the harder it is to control it and orchestrate it. So it's an interesting concept that is not applied uniformly across organizations.
Yeah. I have to apologize. I attributed the Good to Great to Lou Gerson, which he wrote. I think he wrote Making Elephants Dance. It was Jim Collins that wrote Good to Great.
Exactly. And another, Making Elephants Can't Dance is also a great book by Lou Gerson as well. But yeah, Jim Collins is the Good to Great guy.
So one of the ugly factors is, although there's a huge uplift in the project management professional community, the number of certified project managers has never been as high as it has been in the past. A lot of open requests for proposals require the project manager to have some kind of certification, regardless of whether it's Prince 2, IPMA, or PMI, which is a good step in the right direction. These are all good things, but what I think I don't know if I'd call it ugly, but I think one of the biggest challenges, and I always try to remind myself of this, because it's a danger that we might face in the PMI community. We're constantly surrounded by like-minded people who think the same way we do. We sometimes forget that for every certified project manager, there's at least 10, if not 20, or 50 project managers who are toiling away in their projects without any real support, without any framework, without any training. And I think those people are just as important as the ones who are already in the fold. So that's a challenge. You mentioned the fact that there's a new awareness, that there's many more different types of PMOs than we might have assumed also in the past. I think for us, out of our generation, we automatically said, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to be of service, you got to be of assistance, you want to support project management, right? You want to make sure that you do capability building, you train them, you give them templates, you help them with their project management information system. So that was on the granular level. On the next level, he said, well, a lot of these projects are using the same resources. We should be aligning them. There should be some strategic alignment. That was kind of the program thing. I think that the level of project and program awareness is fairly high, although the standard on program management is still this thin. I have a bone to pick, but there's other good books that we'll cover. Al Zaytoun, our common friend and colleague, has written one on program management, so that's one to take a look at. But I think probably, if I were to say what I still think is fairly in its infancy, not amongst people like you and me, because you and I could probably sit down and talk for hours what a portfolio is and how to build one and how to monitor one and how to develop one. The standard for portfolio management is equally as thin as the one for program management. And I find that portfolio management, although from an executive perspective should be the primary interest in project management, has the least amount of determinism, in the sense that somebody's put their foot down and said, this is a portfolio. This is what you need to know about portfolios. I still don't see on the C-suite level, I still don't see a full, comprehensive, integrated approach to portfolio management, and I'll give you my take on that. Portfolio management doesn't come from projects originally. It comes from finance. So there's financial portfolio. I think the C-suite is aware of their financial portfolios. Then there's product portfolios. I think most C-suite levels are also, but what a lot of people don't understand, the bridge between those two, you use financial portfolios to finance project portfolios so that you can deliver or develop new products and services. And that's kind of that ecosystem, that evolution of the three portfolios. If I'm telling you, you're nodding and I can see you smiling a little bit, you're kind of in your head saying, Mark, who are you talking to? I know this stuff inside out. But that's not the issue. It's not that you and I know this. This is what we thought every PMO should be doing, right? Managing portfolios, right? Yeah. But if I were to say what I think is a little ugly still, I still think that portfolio management is one of the weakest practices of a lot of organizations. Would you agree, or what's your take on that?
Well, let's provide a little bit of context, because I want to go back to the PMBOK guide and your comment about it being this thin versus this thick and so forth. I think that within the project management field, we have a yo-yo effect, because as you said, we started out with a very thin guide. And so if you are new to the project management profession, like I was when the first edition came out, it was very challenging, because to someone like me at that time, I didn't know much about project management. I needed it to be very prescriptive. What do I do? What's the first step? What's the second step? What's the third step? I needed a methodology, but I didn't understand at the time that methodology needed to fit the context of the local organizational culture. It couldn't just be one size fits all methodology. And as I became more experienced in project management, and some of the principles that were highlighted in the PMBOK guide became second nature to me, I could just literally set it aside because I knew it, and then I could apply the principles of that foundation, of that framework, to a methodology that I built specific for the organization that I needed. The challenge that we had is we entered that era with the growth of IT. And a lot of IT project managers, particularly in software, were very disturbed by the lack of detail, because remember, the original PMBOK guide was written by seasoned practitioners from a variety of fields, some of them in government, some of them in aerospace and defense, many of them in construction. And it was meant to be a framework that fit most projects most of the time. Unfortunately, many of us who were in IT project management realized that it didn't fit most of our IT projects most of the time. And so over the next 20 years, what happened was the PMBOK guide started expanding and started to look more like a methodology than a framework. And then Agile came out and accused the PMBOK guide of being inflexible and, shifting away from kind of the initial perspective of, fits most projects most of the time. And I think that's the yo-yo effect that we've seen specifically related to the PMBOK guide. The reason I like the PMBOK guide second edition, which now is called the first edition, that was published in '96, was because it was a framework, provided high-level guidance, and then I could tailor it to fit my needs. And that fits me perfectly as a seasoned practitioner, but I recognize that may not be enough for a junior or new entrant into the field. And I think the same type of thing is probably happening in the program and portfolio management guides as well. And to some extent, that's why we were all kind of complaining that there was a missing or a gap in PMOs. So it's great that we have the practice standard. And I'm glad it's called the practice guide rather than a standard like the
manifesto.
Exactly. So I think that's some of the challenge that we've seen. And obviously, another challenge that we have is even when we are in the thick of things, managing programs, sometimes when we get into the weeds, we can't tell the difference between projects and programs. And that's where we kind of get lost. And we just have to kind of, if we are to walk our way out of the weeds, it has to be a return to the principles that then allow us to kind of navigate through them and establish the detailed processes in a way that actually resonates for that organization.
I think
I'm off my soapbox, by the way.
No, stay on it. That's why I invited you. I like people who talk on soapboxes. I think you inherently, intentionally or unintentionally touched upon another subject which I think spans all three, the ugly, the bad, and the good. And that is the subject matter of certification, because hand in hand, or also the PMBOK, I think we can look at those two things kind of as twins. The standard has evolved in many ways in a good direction. In many ways, you can probably pick and choose based on your flavor, what you prefer. But we have to give credit to the fact that the PMBOK is a living document that's revised. I think that's something that's good. I think the fact it's awareness, the fact that it's translated into 12 or 14 different languages is amazing. I think the very fact that in North America it's a standard, and on many other continents it's the quasi standard for project management. I think that's huge. But what goes hand in hand with the certification is also the human need or want to be able to have an external validation that I belong to the club membership, right? And I think one of the things, and I don't envy PMI for this responsibility. I think one of the things that PMI has kind of had to do the splits between these two topics is, what is the certification? Is the certification a validation from a professional nonprofit association which promotes the professional application of project management globally? In other words, they validate, Philip, we've looked at your CV, you've taken a test, we've asked you a couple questions. We can, based on the information we've gathered on you, we can validate, based on your experience, you're a real project manager. You're somebody who understands the the precepts but the focus, and also when we talked about the first PMBOK, the first PMBOK was kind of standoffish when it came to content. Is that if you want to know the content, read these books, right? And then you can get some ideas.
And this is intentional, right? Because it was a guide to the project management body of knowledge, not the guide and not the project management body of knowledge, right? Yeah. The authors of that were very specific that it was effectively an introduction. As you said, you bought the 10 or 15 books that went along with it because it didn't contain all of the knowledge about project management. Yeah.
But I want to go a step further because I think this challenge is not going away, because I guess our viewers can decide if you go online right now. I once did the homework and sat down and tried to gather all of the different certifications that go into project management. I came up with, I think, over 40 of them. Okay. There is at the moment an inflationary amount of certifications that are at home more or less in the project program portfolio sphere. Okay. Mm-hmm. And to be quite honest, I think a lot of the people who I do business with, they might be impressed by the alphabet SETI behind our names, but I always jokingly say they have no idea what the hell it means, and I'm not sure if I know what it means. But I'm going to come to the point I actually want to say. I think that with this new love of certification, I would always say the fruit of something, the seed of something good can be the fruit of something bad in the future, which means the intent of certification is a good one. But if it becomes inflationary and the focus of why I get certified is the wrong one, I often like to ask people, why do they want to get certified? And the number one reason I hear is because I'm trying to get a new job, I want to get a promotion, I want a raise. Okay. Now I'm not judging that those I've probably had thoughts like that before in the past as well. But what I find a pity is that number one reason why I believe you should go for certification is because you want to learn something, which might be a little bit at odds with what I said, what the original focus of certification was. The certification was kind of, hey, we know, hey, Philip, you're educated, you have experience, you've done this. We're going to test some of it just to validate it, but we're not going to step on your toes. We're gonna say what you're talking about, right? Yeah. I think that one of the big challenges that PMI has been facing over the last 20 years, and I think it will continue to face, if it wants to keep the PMP and all of its certifications on a high level, I think they're going to also have to double down, not only on creating exams that are rote memory, right? Where people who prepare for the PMP or for the ACP or for whatever else sit down and memorize a dry set of pages just so they can do well on multiple choice questions that they don't really understand. They know how to answer, but they don't know why that answer is correct, right? Yeah. Because I think that's one maybe ugly face that's out there with certification right now. I know a number of people who are certified who I bow before. They are, they're titans of the industry and they're knowledgeable, and I'd love to have a long-term conversation with them. But there's a lot of people where, I've actually heard statements like this, I got my PMP, it was tough to prepare for. I had to learn a bunch of stuff I've never heard of before. I don't understand why I need it. I managed to squeeze by in the exam, and now that the exam is over, nothing of what is in the PMBOK is what we actually do in real life. And that's a danger. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it is a danger. I have to say that I have strategically avoided throughout my career. Even when I was doing training, I've never done PMP training as part of my professional activities on purpose. The only time that I actually taught a PMP course was early in my career as a volunteer activity with my local chapter. And that's been many, many years ago.
You're smart and a quick learner.
I avoided it. I thought, to me, it felt almost like a conflict of interest at the time when I was on the board. Yeah. Even though it wasn't specifically, I just felt like it was easier to avoid it, because then there was no implication that if you took my PMP course, you had some sort of end to to pass the exam. As I heard you talk about some of the challenges, one thing that I will say, looking back, when I first got introduced to the PMP, I remember folks telling me that it was designed as a knowledge-based certification, not as a competency-based certification. When I was with IBM, actually, the IBM Center of Excellence had designed and implemented a competency-based certification. We're talking about now over almost 30 years ago when they started that process. And within that context of competency-based, the PMP, believe it or not, IBM had decided that it was the first step towards establishing a competency-based IBM certification. So for us within IBM, having the PMP meant that we had the language and we had the knowledge. Then came the test, which was predominantly an interview-based and the documentation of experiences to demonstrate competency, almost like a license. The difference between a PMP type certification versus a driver's license is that the license gives you authority to drive the vehicle, whereas the PMP is not a license. It doesn't give you the authority to manage a project. Now, we realize that almost many organizations, if not all organizations these days, ask for the PMP certification as a precursor to having a position in project management, but it's still not positioned as that. The second element that I think probably was a missed opportunity, and again, I wasn't part of the certification strategy, but PMI did not build advanced certifications for project management beyond the PMP. So when you look at the program management certification, it does not sit on top of it's not a senior project manager or like IPMA's A, B, C, and D. It's just simply a different type. And you can grow in your project management career without becoming a program manager. And you can, in fact, become a program manager without necessarily being a project manager. Similarly, in the same vein, the portfolio management standard and certification, I think that there was a missed opportunity in PMI because you could have almost kind of built a revenue stream, honestly, where you could kind of grow in that certification. In the job market at large, and this is not just within project management, I totally agree with you. There is an ugly side, and it's very visible on resumes, on LinkedIn, and everywhere, where someone has an alphabet soup of certifications, and you even see it even beyond certifications. You see someone that says, "I'm a Harvard graduate," and you look at their LinkedIn profile, they attended a 3-day course at Harvard, or they drove through Harvard University, and now they are.
Which those programs are okay, but they're not the same thing as a degree.
And again, it's not necessarily a knock on the program, but there is a huge difference between having a 2-year MBA or a 5-year PhD, whatever that might be, from a particular academic institution versus attending a weekend course or even attending an executive certification program. All of these sit at different levels, but oftentimes they're almost like positioned as if they're the same thing. And that's part of the need of practitioners and professionals to try and kind of establish differentiation in the marketplace, saying, look at me, I have this type of certification or this type of education background. Because a lot of times the consumers, the organizations, the hiring managers and the HR people don't know what the heck they're looking at when they're trying to hire people. And so you have that alphabet soup trying to kind of attempt to differentiate that, I'm different than the others because I have these certifications and whatnot, as opposed to really getting to the bottom line and engaging the candidate in meaningful dialogue to determine whether they can do the job or not.
But let me go back to your analogy of the driver's license. Should the PMP be a solid indicator that you can drive a car?
I'm not convinced of that, and I'll tell you why. Because when you look at other professions like the engineering profession or the medical profession, they do have licensing. it is a very different path, right? It's hyper local. Local boards have to authorize you to do your job. There are, especially for like PEs, when they sign off drawings, and there's a legal and fiduciary responsibility associated with them. Project management almost operates in a diagonal, whereas it's not a profession that you apply on an individual kind of basis, like a doctor, for example. So I'm not Mark's project manager interacting with you one-on-one from the perspective of a consumer perspective, and I'm not necessarily alone leading the building of a construction site that requires that type of certification. It's an interesting concept. I don't know that it would be significantly beneficial for us from a professional development perspective. I know that in the UK, there's the concept of chartering, and that was a step in the direction of basically saying that, you have to be a chartered project manager. But I think across the globe, it's so divergent, and it applies across so many different industries that it would be probably a bureaucratic challenge to.
I think we're talking about a broad spectrum of learning concepts, which I agree with you. I don't think you can't get the specificity of an industry through a certification. Okay, I think the SIGs were very good indicators of that. But I think I'll take one step back. One thing, I've done a number of PMP prep courses in my lifetime. I just recently was asked by somebody, could I prepare a group of project management for PMP certification? And I go, yes. But the first question I asked them is, what do you want to do? Is, well, we want to get certified. I said, well, why do you want to get certified? Well, and then I asked them, says, do your project managers know how to manage projects? And I'm not saying that if you know how to do this, then you're a good project manager. Says, do they even know what a network diagram is? Not that knowing what a network diagram defines whether you're a good project manager, but it's one thing to memorize a network diagram and a Gantt chart and a configuration management plan and a change management plan and what different types of contracts are out there. But this is what I always tell my clients. I says, you know what? You need to differentiate. Do you want to learn project management? Do you want your team to be able to go out there and use the methodologies and know how and when to apply them, so that you get acceleration in your project? That's one course. But if you want to do certification, that's a different course. And I don't think there needs to be a contradiction in those two, but I think this is important to understand. And I think that there's a lot you can learn from a PMP if you approach it the right way, if you have a more broader approach and a bigger scope of expectation. And I personally think that PMI should commit to it. I think in their validation process, I think one of the things, or two of the things that should be identified for the participant who's getting the PMP is, am I learning something? Am I benchmarking what I know? Is there something new that I learned? I think these are aspects. Like I said, I'm looking at the PMO certification. I'll be taking it end of the month. A lot of people say, well, Mark, why are you taking certifications? How many PMOs have you created? I've created like 12 in my lifetime. I started off in one. Do I really need a certification to validate who I am and what I know? No, but I will say this. First time I came across, I've seen a lot of standards, and most of the standards I've seen, I looked, I yawned, and I said, listen, this is not worth the paper that it's written on. It's boring. It's very one-sided. It's missing a bunch of different factors. But hats off. I had America Pinto on my podcast a couple months ago. I really like this practice guide. I'll say it loud and proud. I think, I think you can agree and disagree with certain aspects or maybe have a different opinion, but on a whole, it's a solid work, a professional work that gives even seasoned project managers tools and a framework to work around. It doesn't define what your PMO is going to be, but it helps you creating that business model. And I think that's.
And I think it's one of the things that's great about it is that it also builds on a lot of work that PMI has done in the space of PMOs in terms of some of the research studies. And as you said before, when you engage a broad swath of practitioners who are in the field to build such a standard. The power of their joint ideas based on their expertise really brings it out. I like the concept. The core concept is very powerful because it's focused on services and the value that it brings to the organization. Understanding what services do we need to provide, and then to what end? Why are we doing that? And that's really part of the power of it. But I do want to kind of go back to react to one comment that you made regarding standards and certification. I remember, when I took the PMP certification, I had to memorize all the earned value formulas, and I wrote them down and memorized them, and got a perfect score on all the questions related to the earned value. I have to say, I must have gone about 20 years between the time that I earned my certification and completely forgetting about earned value, and then working in an organization that I thought could actually benefit from earned value. And this, to some extent, speaks to my own immaturity of practicing project management, because it's so difficult. And I thought, it's really irrelevant and so forth. But over the years, I've become a huge fan of earned value because I actually began to understand how you can apply it properly.
And now you're talking. Now you're going from the ugly to the bad to the good, and I absolutely agree with you. I think a lot of people have the same experience. Funny enough, many years ago, when I was managing a startup company in Florida, we had a product that needed to be re-engineered because it was becoming dated, and our supplier from China, the parts were changing, and we wanted to streamline the product. So we actually went to a small company in Alabama. I don't know where it was in Alabama, but in Alabama, and they came recommended. It was a small company. I think they didn't have much more than 50 employees. And we made a request for information. We said, listen, we've got this product. Could you re-engineer? And then took a look at the hardware. We sent them the hardware. And they came back, and in their offer to us, they used earned value. All right. They showed us an example of, I said, this will last 3 months to do this. These are they didn't call them sprints, but they were, sprint-based things in there. I think a 2-week process. And in those 2 weeks, they always had a 1-page printout of the earned value. And they didn't call it earned value, but it was earned value, where they basically said, we're going to basically chunk down scope, time, and cost per sprint. They didn't call it Agile. It was long before Agile had even hit that company.
Now I will say that in Agile and in software development, the concept of earned value is extremely abstract when you compare it to construction and things you can touch and feel. And it really comes to life when you're dealing with construction. Brick and mortar is extremely visual, obviously, and it makes earned value come to life in that context.
One of the biggest challenges, what makes earned value more legitimate and more tangible, is tangible outputs. In software, what are you going to do? You're going to use lines of code, stuff like that. But what this little company showed me is that sometimes the best way to apply something, and you said something valuable before that as well, and I think a lot of people experience this. I think what the PMP is good at doing is opening up doors to experienced project managers to things that they might not have arrived at yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Earned value, configuration management, right? That they might not have come into that, or what a communication management plan is, or how to build one, right? And when to build one. So I think the PMP does a good job in allowing us to benchmark some of the things he said, we kind of put off and said, but I agree with you. I think the longer you're in project management, it'll eventually come to your door. And this small company from Alabama showed me that, sometimes the way to implement something is to not do it in a big project, but to start in a small project and keep it simple, short, So I think that's valuable. I will say one more thing that I think you mentioned before, and I think I'll say something good about IPMA. I agree with you. I think that the IPMA model for a lot of people is more understandable from a career perspective because there's a 4-tier level thing. I've always substituted the program and portfolio management for those top levels because in reality, that's what they're trying to cover. So I think there is a little bit of parity there. I think what's interesting also on the IPMA thing is that, you have to bring actual projects into play, right? which makes the quality of testing better, but it also makes it more cumbersome and more expensive. So there's pros and cons for both. But I will say this: I have other certifications that when I took the certification, after the certification, I shook my head, and of the 30 people that were in the course with me, and we took the certification on day 2, right? My first comment was, I'm sure that of the 30 people that took this course and are now certified to be Scrum Masters, maybe 2 actually know how to be Scrum Masters, you know? And that's where I asked myself the question, well, what's the certification worth? If you can't do the job after you get the certification, why am I getting the certification? Which is, I think, and I don't want to, pick out anybody in particular. I think any certification has to struggle with it. I think this is an ongoing kind of evolution that when you're moving forward, I think there's a number of quality aspects that you have to work on. And one of them is, are we building capabilities as well? I think that should be part of the mandate of certification.
And if you think of the PMBOK guide and the PMP as a common language, in my podcast, when I talk to practitioners, so many people say that, the reason they got excited about project management is because it gave them a common language. It connected them with other colleagues and other friends and practitioners with that common language.
It's a guild. It's a guild that has its own language. And if you don't have language for what you think, then your thoughts are irrelevant. So common language is a powerful, powerful thing.
Yeah, and it's the same with foreign languages as well. Like when you learn a foreign language, whatever that language might be, the end goal is not to get that certification, put it on the wall, and go back to completely forgetting about speaking it, right? The whole point of learning a language is to communicate with others and use it. Otherwise, what's the point? And and sometimes we kind of tend to forget that in the academic context, that it's nice that I have the PMP or whatever other certification or even degree that I have, but if I don't use it, I lose it. It's like in the Middle East, the joke that we have is that the options for you to pursue a college degree is either medicine, engineering, and if you can't get into either, you go and become a lawyer. And there are so many engineers who are, they graduate and they never practice engineering a day in their life. That's the joke that,
or what they do is they practice. I have a lot of clients that they practice engineering like in the beginning parts of their career path, and then they come into the higher levels of management, and then those are the number one people that I coach. Which is funny because I'll never forget this. I actually went to a large client because a colleague of mine got sick and I had to fill in for him. And when I got to the client, the representative from the client, who was a great guy, a very hardcore engineer, but a little bit autistic, on the autistic spectrum, he came up to me very directly and says, Mr. Engelhardt, nice to have you here. I just want to be honest with you. We didn't want you. That's the first thing he said to me. And I laughed and I said, I went with the flow. I said, there's gold here somewhere. So I said, well, why is that? And he goes, because you're not an engineer. And I go, yeah, I'm a loser. I studied business management and marketing. I mean, that's like, I might as well say I studied clownship and juggling, right? Because that's not a real science. And he laughed. And then I said, I'll tell you what, we have a workshop, a strategy workshop for your project team. Stay with us in the beginning, and if you feel by lunchtime that I can deliver value, that I can add, because let me tell you, this is my assumption. I think you have plenty of engineer people that can answer the engineering questions, but I think you have other issues here. If I can't contribute, tell me and I'll stay. And I've been working for that company on and off now for the last 15 years, and I have a great relationship with them. I think your analogy of language is important, and it's one thing to be fluent in a language that means a lot. It makes you powerful, but I think one of the beautiful things that project management teaches us with integration of multiple knowledge areas is you don't have to be absolutely fluent in all of the other management disciplines, but you need to know enough. It's like when I go to the Emirates, I know a couple words of Arabic and I use them, And people don't. I know that people don't look at him and say, "Oh, he's really fluent." No, they say this guy's a fool. He's a tourist, but we appreciate that he's trying. That also gives you a certain amount of acceptance and leverage when you're communicating with people. And I think I think that's a good analogy for projects. Let's talk about an ugly thing that we kind of talked about a little bit in the beginning, but I think we need to nail it down. We've been doing this for a number of decades now. And one of the benefits of being around for a while is that you can see the ebb and flow of trends and management methodologies that come and go. And, it seems like every 5 or 10 years there's a new hype. Everybody's hyping things up. I don't know about you, but I have a certain sensitivity to things that are hyped too much. I don't have a resistance. I'm open. I'll take a look at it, but I find it sometimes suspect because I think a lot of people are trying to sell you something that's not that can't deliver what they promise. One of the ugly things that I've noticed with a lot of clients who maybe 20 years ago were really at the forefront of developing project, program, and portfolio capabilities, also developing great PMOs. I think a lot of them are in danger now of losing their permanent status. Would you agree with that?
Tell me some more about what you mean by permanent status.
I think in some cases I can think of specific clients where, and the practice guide of the PMO kind of refers to this, is your service delivery. If it's static, you're bound to be redundant and fail somewhere along. You go into the decline phase. And I think there's I won't name the company, but there's a very large company that I deal with where the PMO is no longer called a PMO. It's called, I think, something of business excellence, which, I don't really care what you call it. You can't fool me. If I jiggle it, it's still a PMO to me. But it's gone beyond that. Their mandate has changed. Their standing has changed because, as you said, words are powerful. And if I change the wording, it can have an impact on my perception of legitimacy and scope of influence, right? Mm-hmm. Other companies, I see, when there's a new vice president who comes in, who's confronted with an existing PMO, that might be the first thing that they sacrifice at the altar of cost savings so that they can get their quick wins, right? Other PMOs, I know I have some senior people who've been there for almost 35 years who really built it from scratch before anybody knew what the heck it was for. They delivered value. But it was kind of person-centric, right? So very dominant PMO leader who's eventually going to retirement. And the question is, can his number 2s and number 3 fill his shoes? And is management open to somebody filling their shoes? So these are some scenarios. I'm not saying that this is across the board, but I mean, even in the practice guide, I think they very honestly and openly discuss this thing that I think a lot of organizations tire of PMOs or reevaluate, do we really need this? Does this really need to be a permanent institution? And I think that's a trend that's troubling.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a couple of notes that I've taken down before we started in thinking about the bad side of PMOs. And I think you've touched base on a couple of them. I think one of the bad issues that I see is associating a PMO with being almost like an overhead factory. Mm. And I think that if you only look at a PMO as an overhead side, it tends to be one of the first things that you cut in bad times, or when the leader changes, or the sponsor changes who's paying for the PMO. And alongside that, that's closely related, is the issue of the one size fits all type of PMO. Yeah. And because of that concept, you have the alphabet soup of PMOs. It started out as a project office, it became a PMO, then it's an enterprise project management office.
It might be a program office, then it might be a regional office, value management portfolio office, is it a program office? What the heck is it, right?
Exactly. So it's just like an alphabet soup, and now it's an AI PMO. And that's I understand the marketing side of this. And if you think of it like, I have a friend who's in hospitality and restaurants, and he's quite successful. One of the reasons that he's been very successful is because every 3 to 5 years, they shut down their restaurant that had been highly successful. They renovate, they rebrand, and then they relaunch.
Yeah.
And, in 1 year, it might have been a bar or a pub. The next year, it's a restaurant or a cafe, very much kind of keeping up with the trends of what's happening from a marketing perspective. And as a result, he avoids the staleness that comes with that particular restaurant being the same thing that's delivering in and out. I think that for us, there might be a certain aspect where we're challenged. Oh, it's just the same old PMO. It's been around for 20 years or 10 years and it hasn't delivered the value. So it's time to shake things up. Let me change the name of it. Maybe that changes. But I think that we all come from a change background. We understand that we are in the business of the opposite of business as usual. So if we're trying to implement change, then the PMO has to evolve as well. It can't stay static. It has to change the services. It has to evolve, whatever that might be. And if we approach it from the perspective of, how does the service offering evolve? How does the role of the PMO evolve? If you have to change terminology, you do. I do think that there's a balance that needs to be struck between the alphabet soup of PMOs and what that PMO has to do. So that's something that we're not quite there yet in terms of.
Do you have the same experience? Are you seeing also a certain death or rebirth of PMOs into something new?
I think it depends on the region.
I think the region does make a difference. I think there's different maturity levels in different industries based on how dynamic they are. I think it's a phenomenon that I don't see so much in the GCC. In fact, in the GCC, I see that the GCC is probably riding a high wave of PMOs. I see a lot of PMO directors who are that have influence and have prominence, and I'm happy for it. I see what I'm talking about. I see in primarily in European-based organizations, some global organizations where there's a shift of politics.
So let me put it more from an economic perspective, and let's compare, for example, the U.S. market with the GCC market, and specifically maybe even in Saudi Arabia. Saudi has currently the highest number of giga projects on the planet. I lost track.
To not have a PMO is unthinkable.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about projects that exceed $1 trillion, and you can call them a project, a program, whatever it is, but it's a giga project, a giga initiative over $1 trillion. It requires heavy duty project management and some serious thought in terms of how you approach it, how you set it up. But again, this is in the context of a specific economy that is building a new city in a growth trajectory that is very different than a US mature infrastructure market. The last time that a major city in the US had to think of this was probably at least 40 years ago. Now, in the context, take a city, for example, like Chicago, that has a very mature infrastructure, urban development, so forth. You're not going to have $1 trillion, probably not, hardly $1 billion project within the context of that. Now, you're seeing a re-emergence of this because as cities in the US and economies are looking at an infrastructure overhaul or an uplift, you're seeing some rejuvenation and a need for more project management maturity. So it's just kind of a difference in terms of how you approach it. Similarly, when I was in the US managing large, complex IT programs or projects within the IBM context, we were talking about projects that were, 30,000 hours of programming just for the software development. That's quite complex, at least at the time, as compared to a small IT, third-party implementation somewhere else. So the type of organization, where it is, as well as where you are in the world, very much kind of influences how you see the need for PMOs and projects, and subsequently how the profession grows as well. But for the most part, most organizations in the US that consider themselves mature are probably at least on their second iteration of PMOs. They've implemented the PMO probably a solid 20 years ago. They've either refined it, evolved it, did away with it, and then brought it back. That's different from, for example, some of the giga projects that you see where they're just starting out and they're establishing their first PMO. So there tends to be a very different dynamic in terms of how you interact with that.
I'm listening to you and I'm seeing it from a different perspective. I hadn't really thought of the maturity of a company, of a market, of an economy, and how that plays a role. This is what I would say. It'd be interesting to hear if you agree with it. I still think, regardless of what the maturity is, for me, if you are an organization of a certain size, okay, and projects play a role in your organization, there's always a need for a PMO. Maybe I would give the caveat, you shouldn't take your resources and your status for given. I think one of the bad traditions that I think a lot of PMOs have maybe fallen into in their routine is that they need to shake the boat in a positive sense. The concept of do good things and talk about it. Okay, don't constantly whine about what isn't and what you would like to have, but do it. And then I think most importantly, I think there's a quote I'm thinking of, I can't remember exactly. I think one of the biggest mistakes that experts have in their expertise is they've fallen in love with their subject matter, and they've forgotten that most other people that they communicate to are not that exceedingly interested in or familiar with their, paradigms, with their frameworks, with their vocabulary. And if you don't have the patience and the finesse and the grace and the marketing ability to talk to people who are not as interested in your subject matter and make them interested, I think, there's an old saying, every time you point a finger at somebody, it's because of, the executives, they're not giving us the awareness. My question is, every time I've been in a PMO, I've managed to make a big bang, Are you even trying to reach out? I mean, the first question I ask people when they're in a PMO, I said, who's your sponsor? Do you know what the standard response is when I ask them that question? What? Sponsor? I said, yeah, who's your PMO sponsor? Oh, I thought only projects have sponsors. I said, well, they should and often don't either. I said, but you in particular need to have a sponsor. Oh yeah, but we have the practice guide talks about having multiple sponsors because sometimes it's difficult to have one. It might be like an executive steering committee, which I think is a workaround as well. But I said, you know what, if you're never going to have the same status as a department with resources and committed budgets and being an understood part of the overall organization's drive. So the only way for you to survive is you need to have the ear of a god or a demigod. You need that protection. You need somebody who says, I'll go back to what you said, and I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said it. The saving grace of a PMO is if you can, from top to bottom, right, from the executive level down to the execution level, can tickle people's fancy. If you can speak in the strategic, if I can, instead of talking about, hey, I need more resources and I need to buy some enterprise tool that nobody knows what it does and for a lot of money, I said, I need to be able to talk to you in your language, and your language is, am I going to help? What strategic objectives am I going to help you achieve this year? Can I quantify them? Am I providing you the information before you ask for it? Okay. Am I asking you questions that are interesting? Because I think the number one feedback I get from executive steering committees when it comes to the meetings last too long. They're way too much in detail, and we're not interested in the detail. We want a good management. Can't you give us a one-page summary? Right? Mm-hmm. That's a skill set that I think a PMO needs to do. So I think that's part of it. I will say one other thing. I think one toxic element of a PMO that I think people don't like to address is the more a PMO grows, and it has this kind of, remember the word scope creep?
Mm-hmm.
It has this scope creep thing. It starts off managing projects and then manages programs, and it starts doing this. And the more we integrate and the more services and service clients we add to our list, sometimes the more diffuse our actual influence is. But the more we are interfering with other people's sphere of influence or authority. No.
I'll tell you, you've touched on a couple of very interesting threads. I think that from my perspective, and this may fit kind of within the context of the bad side as well. When we, as PMO practitioners, focus on working with executives and project champions, whether it's the sponsors as well as the project managers and so forth, to provide that necessary line of sight on project performance, that is really only one dimension, because so many companies and so many organizations suffer from that lack of clarity. Executives complain, I don't know where the heck the status is. Like, where are you? Like, we've given you this money. You've gone off on the side. You're working on this project. Where are you? What have you done, right? We forget a very critical element where PMOs can add a significant degree of value in the organization, is actually measuring the value and the outcome of the project. If you're dealing with the sales department, for example, and the VP of sales tells you, we're not going to measure my department by the revenue, or we're not going to measure it by the number of sales. We're going to just measure it by how well we, report on the number of visits that we've done. No problem. So going back to my analogy, if we're looking at a sales VP and they're trying to convince us that they shouldn't be measured by the amount of revenue and sales that they've brought in, we would laugh at them. Similarly, if you're in a health insurance company and you're dealing with the director of claims and they're telling you, don't measure me by the claims that were adjudicated, the speed of the claim process or the quality, again, we laugh at them. Within the context of the PMO, there has to be an element that looks at the value of projects, the KPIs related to project success, and reporting on, did they deliver the value? And I think that in the absence of that, whether it's because of laziness, complexity, and oftentimes maybe not even that, but rather people just move on. The nature of projects is that, the project manager comes in, they manage the project from beginning to end, they move on to the next project, but the value that was identified in terms of what that project was supposed to provide, sometimes it might take months or years after the project is done. The PMO has to be the custodian of that if you are in that flavor of PMO, right? If you are in that enterprise PMO function or the departmental PMO, if you are not the custodian of value in the organization, then you're not really providing value. You're not really.
You mentioned three important things that I want to reiterate, because I think we need to double down on them, and I would summarize the first point I heard from what you were talking about. I once overheard a department head and a project manager arguing about who's going to get key resources. And the department head looked at the project and the project manager said, yeah, but my project has high priority. We have strategic relevance and stuff like that. And the department head looked at the project manager and said, this is what he said to him. He says, you spend money, I make money. Right? Oh, and that was like a kick in the nether regions, right? And it was a rhetorical masterpiece of statement. And it addressed another aspect which is baked into the framework of projects, and it's deeply ingrained us in the PMBOK philosophy. One of the defining characteristics of a project based on the PMBOK and every other standard, as well as the concept of temporariness, right? That a project has a beginning and an end, and that is a helpful defining and a defining element of scope of responsibility, but it is inherently also the the curse of project management, because if you look at it from that perspective, and I'm going to reiterate what you said, most projects can be lucky if they can validate a quantitative benefit within months, let alone in years. And the question is, who's going to be around in 3 years? And then also, if we go back to another thing, which is, I think also, there used to be these studies. I don't know if they're still doing them, from Standish Group and from Gartner. They used to do these assessments of what projects are successful. The question was, what criteria did they use? In scope, in time, in cost. And the question there is, well, there's two things you're going to measure. One, how was the project measured from a capability perspective, and what was the output, the outcome, the impact? And I find it interesting that the concept of output, outcome, and impact is as old as humanity, but is still a conceptual challenge today, right? That we use terms like OKR. I think OKR, in my opinion, is not specific enough. I think the words output, outcome, and impact are better. But I think there's a huge opportunity for PMOs to focus on that. And like I said, the whole value concept that is, we're doubling down. It's not new. I object to anybody saying it's new, but I'm on board about pretending like it's new, if that's what's gonna, if that's the, it's like when you're taking a ram and you're trying to break into the gates of an ancient city. The first 100 times you hit the gate, it cracked, but it didn't break. If we have to take one more thing and rename the ram to get to get the head in there, I'm all for it. So I think one of the, I don't know if it's ugly or bad, I think the concept of success is not sufficiently defined in most people's heads. And I think it's also the key to executive awareness and endorsement. If we could perfect
and success is even more complicated than that. So, or complex. When you think of success metrics related to time, cost, and scope, that's one side of the equation. But even when you shift to the business KPIs that are associated with the launch of a new product or building a new
qualitative
building or whatever, and looking at the value that it brings, there are both quantitative and qualitative measures to this. You can easily say, okay, I've built a new building and I've sold X number of flats or apartments, and I've generated this amount of revenue. That works great in certain instances, but in instances where you're looking at it purely qualitatively, it's almost like looking at cooking. You can take the recipe, follow the recipe in exactly the same steps as it prescribes, with the same ingredients, and then as soon as the person who's eating it tastes it, thinks, oh, this is disgusting. Or even worse, you and I could taste the same dish. You think it's good, I don't think it's good. The qualitative side is open to debate, and that's where the complexity is, because success is both. It's the project management element, it's the value elements, and it's quantitative and qualitative all combined, and that's what makes it so complex.
Yeah. Well, we've touched upon a bunch of different topics. I'll summarize a little bit that would fall either under ugly or bad. One would be the perception that PMOs are outdated and are too focused on red tape and don't provide visual value, which was one thing we talked about, which ties into the sustainability of PMOs. We just talked about the concept of what defines success, and do we have a process to validate success? And it's not only quantitative, it's also quality. A famous, I've said this in a couple of podcasts, but I still think it's great, so I'm going to repeat it. I was at a concert recently, and one of the guys was wearing a T-shirt, and on top of the T-shirt it said "sound engineer," right? And underneath it said, as a definition, sound engineer, nobody knows what I do until I stop doing what I do. And I think you and I both agree that, project management could belong to that gray workforce, which is highly essential to the success of a delivery value chain. But I don't think we're not sufficiently aware of how we position. Are we people even know what the heck we do? Or are we just that gray workforce in the background? It's kind of like when you produce, when Steve Jobs or Elon Musk gets up on stage and presents a new product like they invented it, and we all said, yeah, he invented it. No, you didn't. There's 1,000 engineers behind you who shed blood, sweat, and tears, but you don't see them. It's kind of also the same thing since you talked about restaurants. In restaurants, the cooks are that's a hard skill to learn. It's a tough job. But who gets all the glory? It's usually the waiters who get the tip. Why? Because they're the ones who are, or if you're going to go the difference between engineering and sales. So that's an aspect that's a challenge. We talked about maybe the insufficient executive attention or awareness. We talked about toxic behavior and we talked about certification. Let's shift from the ugly and bad to the good, because I know that you and I are both diehard idealists, and the reason why we like to stand on soapboxes is because we still think that we matter and other people matter, and we want to change the world and make it a better place and leave a legacy. Where do you see good trends and things going on, either in projects, programs, portfolios, or PMOs?
This kind of brings back to mind, this entire discussion brings to memory a conversation I had with a friend of mine who also served on the board, Karen Tate. And
yes.
She joined PMI a few years before I did, and was one of the early people who got the PMP certification. And she's, I remember she told me once she joined PMI because of the slogan at the time. I think maybe in the 1993 timeframe. And the slogan at the time was "Associate with the winners."
Okay.
And that's such a powerful statement, because regardless of, how you do things, how you build certifications, how you kind of spread the word, it's really about associating with the winners. And I think this is one of the good parts of both project management and PMOs. There's a sense of optimism, and there's a sense that you do deliver value. Even sometimes when it's not quite tangible, there is an association with winners. There's an excitement about it. And I think that the excitement really can be distilled by saying that PMOs are profession enablers. They are the brain trust of project management in the organization, and they help professionalize the practice. They help kind of take it to the next level. So that's one of the good parts of it. And alongside that is the fact that it has really become at least an opportunity, if not many times a value multiplier in organizations. If you're able to lean into the business side, work alongside the colleagues so that you're actually not seen as an overhead, but rather right there in delivering value, it can really show a great deal of value to the executives that you're really helping the organizations grow, 10x, save significant amounts of money. It's no longer just simply about overhead and spending money, but rather, if you're speaking the language of the business, this is how much money I've saved you. This is how much money we grew. Yeah. This is the number of months that we've short-circuited in terms of delivering products and services. I think that all becomes a trust builder in organizations. Yeah. And it actually is exciting to executives, because now you're speaking their language. And specifically, if your PMO is an enterprise PMO, you need to speak the language of the CEO or the CFO. If you're an IT PMO, you need to speak the language of the CIO. If you're a marketing PMO, you need to speak the language of the CMO.
And one of the lovely things I think about the practice care, which I 100% I've experienced in the last 30 years myself, if you're going to be more than a supporting, if you're also going to be a monitoring, controlling element, you got to understand the only way that you can actually do that monitoring and controlling aspect is if the people you're monitoring and controlling see you as an added value. Mm-hmm. If they just see you as a pain in the butt that's slowing them down, who doesn't know what the heck their needs and problems and challenges are, but you want to torture them with some stupid Excel sheet, that process is not going to fly. And
I'll give you a very practical and real-world example. In one of the PMOs that I led, I had two project management type people who were more project reporter than really project manager in that context. One of them literally took a chair, sat down in the same space as the business, worked with the business team day in, day out, when there was a task that needed to be done, even if it was not the project manager task, if he could contribute, he jumped in and helped them do it. When they argued, he argued with them. When they celebrated, when they cried, he cried with them. Very much embedded himself.
You have to be, I'm going to rephrase it. I think what you're talking about is if you become aloof as a PMO, you lose support. You need to. It's okay to have referent power in the sense that people look up to you for how your expertise and what you all know. But if you're, this is one of the things I've noticed about a lot of Scrum Masters. A lot of Scrum Masters want to get like all sorts of certifications, and then they're like hands off. They don't want to get their hands dirty. And I said that's the greatest part of being a Scrum Master is getting down there in the trenches. The management by walking around. By coming in with a formal process, but be willing to throw the formal process out the window and do a leaner version of it if that's the way to do it. I absolutely agree. I think that's a important.
And I think that the flip side, as you said, the other guy in this particular example, the other project manager was someone who just sat at his desk 24/7 and once a week would call up the team lead, and he says, "Look, I've got the PowerPoint deck open and I've got your name against this task. What % complete are you?" Yeah. And you can imagine the type of response that generated from that person if they were even still on the phone, because there was no embeddedness, there was no skin in the game, there was no, you were not part of the team, and you're just seen as
you were part of my pain and not part of my gain. Yeah,
exactly. And then for lack of better words, you're seen as a traffic cop. You're just not adding value. You're just there to just record and move on. And that's I think that's a tragedy if you're not really involved and embedded. And by the way, don't mistake this for me or even you saying that you have to do the task. That's not really what we're talking about. Yeah. We're not talking about that project manager who's just gonna roll up their sleeve and start programming. That's not what we're talking about in terms of being able to add value. It's just being there with the team and working with them to deliver that value.
So what are other good trends that you see that you can think of? I mean, if I were to throw some things out there, I think one thing that's good is that PMI is alive and well. I think it's in good new management hands. I think Pierre is a valuable, kind of a fresh generation, new face. So I think that's good. I'm totally excited about. I mean, every old generation likes to complain about the younger generations, just like they like to complain about us and tell us we're no longer relevant. If you get past those stupid mind games, the silliness of that, the childishness of that, I'm really excited about the new generation that's coming up, and I'm also really excited that we still have an opportunity to interface with them and learn from them. And hopefully also they learn from us so that they don't make the same mistakes we did. I think that's one.
I think it's interesting that you make this comment. I do this video series that are short videos that are a minute long that I post on LinkedIn. And one of the videos that's coming up, it's kind of a spoiler alert because I think it's coming up. I recorded it's coming up tomorrow, where I talk about Gen Z.
Yeah.
And for so many old generation, it's always complaining about
like every generation before them. Yeah.
And this is my fear, is that we're seeing the way that our parents' generation or the older generations are seeing. But what I talk about is, in my interaction with Gen Z, it's nothing but positive praise that I have. In my latest assignment, we had a very bizarre and amazing situation because of the size of the program and the number of stakeholders. It was probably the first time in my career where we had 5 generations of workers in the big team. Imagine, we've got people who were, pre-World War II. We had baby boomers, we had Xers, millennials, Gen Z. And what was amazing to me is interacting with our colleagues who were Gen Z professionals who just had maybe a year or 2 of experience. They're digitally native, they're geographically present in the moment, and they came out into the workforce with skills that took us years to master. Yeah. Teamwork, ability to communicate effectively, persuade through the art of communication and language. Those are skills that are very hard for us, at least in the older generations. It took us a while to kind of master them. And you see them right then and there. In fact, you talk about Scrum Master. My son is starting his 4th year of college in a few weeks. He got his Scrum Master certification a year ago.
Good for him.
He's in game programming. It's incredible that this younger generation is already coming into the workforce ready to hit the ground running, as opposed to, let's sit on the side for a few years, learn the language, learn the skills. And that's very exciting to me because it raises the level. Now you're talking about professionals who have a higher level of knowledge, ready to engage. But frankly, they are also individuals we can learn something from. It's not just simply one direction in terms of the learning. It's 2 directions.
Yeah. No, so I agree with you. I think that's normal. I think that's just part of the changing of the guards, that the old ones complain about the new ones. But I think there's a lot of promise in the Generation Z, and whether or not they turn out good or not really is very, very much also dependent on how we're willing to interact with them. And like I said, learn from them and also teach them. I think one other, it could also fall under ugly, bad, or good is the topic of AI. I think it's
good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are seeing a lot of potential for efficiency. From a bad or an ugly perspective, I think a lot of the applications we're just throwing out there without any kind of safety net. I think organizations that don't have very solid principles might make resource decisions that they'll regret in hindsight. I think there's a pressure also from a more capitalistic shareholder perspective. We expect you to fire a bunch of people now that you have AI. Whether that's smart or not is a different story. I think that runs the gamut. What's your take on AI?
I think it's a powerful tool that we have to engage with. It's one of the forces that is front and center. It's not something that you could just kind of bury your head in the sand and ignore. One area where I think is still immature is around, for lack of better words, regulation. I think that the Dubai government in particular, as you look at it, is actually a leader in this area, where they've adopted a standard definition when it comes to content. And and you see it, like on LinkedIn and in interacting with organizations. My daughter's working within an organization, and they're struggling with, to what extent do we use AI when we're writing proposals? For example, do we let ChatGPT write out a proposal? And then the donor organizations, when they see this, what are they going to think, right? So the government of Dubai a few weeks ago, I think maybe a month ago, launched a new classification where, specifically related to content. Is it human-led? Is it human-led but AI influenced? Or is it AI-led? And these type of innovative solutions where you're looking at how can governments add value? It's exactly that. It's looking at how do we govern this in a way to ensure that human beings are enabled, protected, and empowered as well, because it's not just simply about replacing. I think that the future to me is human and machine. It's not either human or machine.
I think it needs to be. I think I agree with you. I think AI from an operational efficiency perspective has a lot of potential. There's a lot of dangers that I don't think most people have thought of and are aware of. The whole principle of how much of it is what's the veracity of the data that I'm getting. Also, the potential of losing, not having sufficient thought in making decisions on how you interact, for example, with client complaints. I was just talking to my wife this morning, and she says, she's already facing automated systems where she knows what she needs, but it's not working, and she can't talk to anybody because everything's automated. Which is that kind of I don't know if you're familiar with that show Little Britain, where they have the sketch where this one person is sitting at the computer, no matter what you ask them, his computer says no. And that's, I think, a danger that we face. And I think another thing which I think both project management, agile, Six Sigma, Lean, and also AI will suffer if they don't watch out. I think the people who stand to gain a lot from selling it are hyping it to a certain degree that I don't believe it's even possible to fulfill that expectation.
Yeah.
That's one extreme, and I think there might be kind of where you get kind of jaded in a couple of years down the road. We say it didn't deliver everything it promised. I think that's part of it, and I think the other real big challenge is I think most people are parroting the statement, yes, it's valuable, it's going to create more efficiency, it's going to change the world. But I still think that most organizations from an operational perspective still don't know how to make the thing work.
Yeah. Let me make 3 comments specifically around AI that dovetail into some of the points that you made. First is AI has been around for a while. It's not new. And generative AI is one use case that there are plenty of other areas, especially when you start looking at AI and robotics and a whole variety of technologies that converge. There's not enough understanding, I think, in the ecosystem of all of the different ways that organizations can leverage AI. There's a lot of hype around generative AI because it's front and center, it's consumer driven, it's interesting, and it's new. So we have to understand that it's not just one area, but it's a broad topic. The second element is related to AI when it comes to the ChatGPT version, where we're talking about generative AI. If you are dealing with individuals who are not experts in a particular field and you don't know what you're looking at, there's a huge risk, right? So if I am interested in the topic of microbiology and I don't really know much about microbiology, and I'm researching something and I'm taking whatever output I'm getting as if it's gospel and I'm not challenging it, not because I'm lazy, but because I genuinely don't understand anything, I need that expert to validate that information. I've been using ChatGPT extensively, especially in terms of analysis, looking at data. If you're not checking behind the system, sometimes you get lulled into thinking that the insights that you're getting are real. And then when you start looking at the data, you realize that there's something quite wrong because you're not. And again, it's not necessarily that the AI is doing a bad job or hallucinating, although there are certain instances of that. But there is a human role in that is critical to that. If you're talking about geology, you need someone who knows geology to be able to validate that information. Otherwise, you can try it out for project management topics. Not everything that it's giving you.
What you're alluding to is very, very powerful philosophical discussion around: do we even know what is AI supposed to relieve us of?
Yeah.
And where is the human factor, and where do we stay in the whole process? I think
that brings me to the third comment that I made. I bet you that if you look back 10, 15 years ago, when we look at artificial intelligence, a lot of what we were thinking about was robotics as well. I need AI to help me do the dishes or do the laundry much more than write a poem for something or another, or write a song. And yet the novelty of that is great, but let's talk about practicality. And I think that we're losing something like, yes, I can replace a creative field type of person, but is that really the best use of that? And obviously, a lot of people in the creative arts area are very disturbed by the fact that you've got these systems like ChatGPT and others who are, there's a lot of vagueness around that intellectual property. And, there are people who are complaining that these AI systems are, for lack of better words, stealing IP. And again, as a non-expert, if I ask my AI, draw me a picture, I don't really know whether they're stealing somebody else's picture or whether they're creating something new. The way that we interact with it makes us almost believe that we're actually interacting with an intelligent system. And I think that it's not quite there yet.
I think
there's a difference between real intelligence and
I think
artificial
that
intelligence.
There's many forms of intelligence. I think one would have to have a concept which intelligence is one talking about. I think every once in a while when I deal with artificial intelligence, I'm kind of shocked by how non-intelligent it is. Based on my expectations of what it should do, and also partly my prompting.
I am a fan, and I'm definitely not of the Skynet variety of of individuals who are worried about doom and gloom scenarios. But I'm also realistic in terms of how we need to approach it as well.
But you know what I think that just makes the whole AI journey more interesting. Is that it's fraught with challenges and dangers, but it's going to challenge humanity to grow and sometimes in the wrong direction, but hopefully then also back into the right direction. I think there's a lot of problems. I would also say if we were to follow up on the generation thing, I think one of the things that's really, really good about our discipline is there's lots of new topics that are expanded into our project management field, be it business analysis. That's also not new, but we're making forward progress there. The new PMO practice guide is a sensational step in the right direction. I think it was one of the missing links. I'm going to have Mark Lyons and Scott Ambler on one of my next podcasts to talk about the originators of discipline agile. I know that among some of the hardcore practitioners, discipline agile is considered, the graduate level of agile. I'm also going to have a follow-up conversation with Joshua Barnes after them, because Joshua Barnes is the PMI product owner that's going to talk about, there's a lot of changes going on with discipline agile. Where's it going to go? So those are examples of I think what's exciting, even if some of it is not as new as we sometimes pretend it is, I think that we're repackaging, rebirthing a lot of the things that you and I worked with 30 years ago for the new generation to make it viable and maybe more applicable, more efficient. I think this is part of the real good thing in project management. I think if you just mentioned your son is in the last year of college. My two boys are just finishing up their bachelor's as well. I think this is an exciting era to be in. I still think that project management is an exciting career path. So I think there's a lot of promise there. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would say that would fall into the category of good?
I think maybe more broadly around project management and specifically PMOs is the fact that project management has always been inclusive.
Yeah.
And that has been a very powerful, to build on what you just said earlier. It is an inclusive community, inclusive discipline, very broad. It's a big umbrella, big tent that really has room for everybody that's very interested, as opposed to that exclusive nature where, maybe other professions or other fields that tend to kind of weed out people. And I think that's actually a very good thing for not just the discipline, but for community at large. The more, the better. I think that's very powerful for us.
You mentioned how you got into project management over almost 30 years ago now in Boston. If you were in that same age you were back then, would you still want to become a project manager?
I think so. I've been told that I have an ADHD problem sometimes, and I think that project management is extremely well suited because I like the change. I like the ability to kind of do something new, and the world of projects offers that like no other. I think I would be extremely bored in a very traditionally operational role that's building cars or very process driven, that's producing the same thing. And that's not to say that there's not value in those, but for me, I like the fact that there's variety and there's change and a new challenge ahead.
Yeah. Now, neither you and I are 20 anymore, but we're still on the playing field. For those viewers who've been watching us, and you know what, this Philip guy is interesting. I'd like to know what else he's up to. What are things that you're working on right now? in your where's your scope of influence, your focus what are the things that people can look forward to hear or see from you?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's very exciting, that's been a personal project of mine, is a platform called Rapid Start PMO. It's a SaaS platform that we've launched that helps professionals in the PMO space to design, plan, build, and launch PMOs, and then ultimately align PMOs depending on the life cycle of where your PMO is. It's right there helping you basically take those specific organizational needs, frame them, identify the type of services that your organization needs from a PMO, and then helps you build it. That's been my primary focus over the past few months in basically launching that SaaS platform that individuals can come on and use in a subscription-based model to basically leverage it. It's currently...
So it's a cloud-based software, but I'm sure there's like consulting services that go hand in hand with it, right?
Yeah, it's a cloud-based model, subscription-based. We're currently in a private beta platform, but if individuals are interested, we would welcome their participation in that beta platform. It's intended to be a companion, especially for those in organizations that don't have big consulting budgets, to help them, through that journey. And it's been a passion project of mine, because the reason that I got started, that if you look, 2 decades ago, when I went into organizations for the purpose of selling PMO consulting services, I recognized that so many of the organizations I was talking to were like, what is a PMO? How is it supposed to be? So that opened the door for training. And then, and that opens another door for, education and so forth. So that's been a lot of what I've been focused on. Obviously, I'm out there on LinkedIn and social media talking about different
you're very
topics.
active. I follow you.
Yeah, and I always welcome a good conversation. And
reach out to Philip on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Well, Philip, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we will be talking soon again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for taking so much of your time to discuss the ugly, the bad, the good. I'm happy that we reversed the order and ended off with the good. I think that's a high note. It's always good to end on a high note instead of a low note.
And I'll also give a plug to the podcast, Project Management Matters, and you're going to be my guest
yes,
as well. So I think that's another area where you can connect with both of us.
Look forward to it. Philip, thanks a lot, and all the best.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.